What's up everybody, how's it going? In this video, I'm going to help you communicate better as a software engineer. Though to be honest, even if you're not a software engineer, the tips or tools that I'm going to be sharing with you in this video are definitely going to help you. This applies to anybody, although it's particularly relevant to software engineers, but so definitely keep watching even if you're not a software engineer. And so specifically, I'm going to be sharing 4 tips or techniques or tools that you can use to communicate better, to improve your communication skills. Now, just for a tiny bit of context, the reason that I'm doing this video right now is in part because I've always valued communication. I think it's very important, but also recently in my latest video, someone commented about this, saying that they appreciated my communication. They were wondering if I could make a video about it or even a course about it. And so I figured, since a lot of people even in the past have asked me about this, now is a great time to make such a video. And so here we are. So with that, let's no longer beat around the bush. Let's jump into tip number 1 or technique number 1 to improve your communication skills, which is to know your audience. That's right, whenever you're communicating, whether verbally or in writing, it's very important that you know who it is that you're communicating with. So let me explain, and this is where it's particularly relevant for software engineers because they always, or often rather, make this mistake. If you're communicating with someone who is outside of your domain of expertise, so let's say you're a software engineer and you're communicating with a product manager or a UX designer, or maybe someone even further removed from the technicals of your job, like let's say someone who's in the marketing department. If you're communicating with these types of people, you cannot use language or concepts or reference technologies that they're going to be unfamiliar with. If you do that, you're just going to confuse them. You're going to lose them in your speech or your email or whatever it is that however it is that you're communicating, and it's just not good. And I see this all the time. Like I remember when I was at Google or at Facebook, I would see this firsthand, a software engineer referencing some sort of acronym that is only relevant to engineers to a UX designer. And the person just doesn't know what they're talking about. And sometimes they'll say it out loud, sometimes they won't. I actually wrote a post about this recently on LinkedIn. So by the way, if you're not following me on LinkedIn, then definitely follow me there. But I wrote a post exactly about this. And by the way, this doesn't apply just to when you're communicating with people who aren't software engineers or who are outside your domain of expertise. This also applies when you're talking to someone who's not at the same level as you. So for example, if you are a senior engineer or not even a senior engineer, maybe you're just an engineer, like a new grad, right? It's your first time in the industry, but you've been working at a company for 6 months. And so you're familiar with the internal tools of the company, with the code base, and someone's new to the team, someone's brand new, and you're talking to them and you refer to parts of the code base that they don't know, or you refer to parts of the internal tool stack that they don't know, well, you're going to lose them. So again, you have to know your audience. And I saw this firsthand when I was at Google. It's just a really poor practice. It's not good for your communication. And so it will go a long way if you really tailor the way that you communicate, whether verbally or in writing, to the person that you're communicating with. And the last thing that I'll say about this point is that it also applies when you're communicating with someone who's much more experienced than you or who's just as experienced as you, because in those cases, to improve your communication, you want to make sure that you don't go too far into the weeds of things that they already know. So in those cases, if you're talking to someone who's just as familiar as you are with, let's say, the code base, then you can reference things or use certain acronyms that you know they will know perfectly fine. And if anything, it's encouraged that you do that in those cases. And by the way, some of you might be wondering, okay, but what do you do when you don't know your audience, right? Sometimes you're talking to someone whom you don't know super well. Or for example, when I'm on YouTube and I'm filming a video, I don't know exactly who's going to be watching my video, right? I've got a big audience. Thousands, if not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people might be watching the video. They're all of various backgrounds and experiences. And so when you don't know your audience that well, what you want to do, and this brings me to tip number 2, is you want to over-communicate. Favor over-communication over or instead of under-communication. I cannot stress enough how much better it is to over-communicate than to under-communicate. Now, what do I mean by over-communication? I just mean going above and beyond to make whatever it is that you're saying clear and unambiguous. And here that can mean going into more detail, that can mean giving a little bit more information, that can mean repeating things once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, however many times it takes to ensure that there's complete clarity. And again, this applies both verbally and in writing. So for example, verbally, let's say you're at the end of a meeting, sometimes it's very good to repeat the conclusion that has come out of the meeting to make sure that everyone is on the same page. Because believe me, so many times, you'll end a meeting and you'll be like, okay, so we all know what we're doing. Everyone's like, yep, thumbs up. And then you realize, like, no, 2 people didn't really realize what they were supposed to do, or they came to a different conclusion, or they interpreted the conclusion differently. There's nothing worse than coming out of some sort of communications channel with one party not having actually understood what was communicated. And so as an example, if you've checked out my company, Algo Expert, I suppose this is a great time to plug it. If you're a software engineer preparing for their coding interviews or systems design interviews, then do check out my company, Algo Expert. Go to algoexpert.io and use the promo code CLEM, CLEM, for a discount on the platform. But so you may have noticed, if you've checked out Algo Expert and if you've watched some of our video explanations, that at least the ones that I film, and even that our new instructors have been filming, I've really been encouraging them to do this, we tend to over-communicate. We really want to make sure that the explanations are as clear as possible. If there's a little point that has room for ambiguity, you really want to hammer it to make sure that the viewer comes out completely clear. And of course, this is in contrast with under-communication, where you leave the person that you're communicating with the sense of doubt, or with the sense of, I guess I'm going to interpret what you told me in this way, but I'm not really sure. And here, a great example for software engineers that I would always see happen, again, even at a company like Google, is in pull requests. When people are reviewing code and they're leaving comments, some people will under-communicate in their comments. So they'll leave a comment like, we shouldn't do this. We should actually use the API for this. And it's like, okay, well, which API should we use? Or how do we use it? Maybe there are multiple ways to use it. Or, if you tell me like, oh, don't reinvent the wheel, just use the built-in JavaScript methods. Okay, well, there are 3 built-in JavaScript methods that do what I could do with them, right? So what are you suggesting exactly? Again, better to over-communicate, write a bigger paragraph, repeat certain things. If it's unclear after one paragraph, just write another one where you say, to clarify, or to be clear, what I'm really saying here is that you should use, array.map. Just giving an arbitrary example here, but you get the point. Over-communicate, do not under-communicate. Tip number 3, structure. You want your communication to be structured. Whether you are giving a speech, or you are filming a video, or you are in a meeting and speaking up, or you are asking a question to someone, or you are leaving a comment on a pull request, you want your communication to be structured. And the best piece of advice that I can give you here, it's very simple, because of course, you could ask me, well, what does structure mean, right? There's so many different ways to structure speech or communication. Well, the best way that I can describe it is, or something that's worked really well for me, is if you think back to high school or middle school, and this is particularly applicable to people who went to school in the US, maybe people who went to school abroad, in other countries have had the same experience, but for the people in the US, you probably remember in English class, when you had to write essays, that you had the classic 5-paragraph essay, right? Where you have an introduction with a thesis. The thesis is like the final line or 2 lines of the introduction that really, from that single line, you should be able to understand what the essay is going to talk about. And the rest of the introduction basically introduces the topic. Then you've got 3 to 5 body paragraphs that basically talk about whatever it is that you're talking about, and they're all kind of distinct, and they all have some sort of nice transition to make them flow seamlessly. And then finally, you've got a conclusion. And that is exactly the way that you should think about your communication the next time that you communicate. Now, of course, this looks a little bit different depending on how you're communicating. If you're doing something like a video on YouTube, like I'm doing, you might notice that all my videos have this similar vibe where I have some sort of introduction in the first minute. And sometimes my thesis happens immediately. Like I think for this video, I opened the video by saying, I'm going to help you communicate better, right? That's the thesis. And then there's a little bit more introductory material. Then at the end of the videos, there's a conclusion. And usually, I summarize the videos. That's where I can, link to new topics, like, telling you to follow me on my social media. By the way, you should follow me on Twitter. I'm tweeting once a day in 2021. You don't want to miss out. I'm having a lot of fun there. So the point is, yes, introduction, conclusion, and then in the middle of the videos, here a video like this one where I'm sharing 4 tips, it's very easy, right? It's effectively like having 4 body paragraphs. But then, for something like, if you're in a meeting and you're asking a question to your manager or something, the way that you can think about structure is, how can you make sure that whatever it is that you're about to ask them is going to make as much sense as possible? And maybe a way to think about it is like, if you were posting it on a forum, how would you post it such that the readers who might have even less context than you do or than your manager does could understand it? And again, here, of course, it's also difficult when you're communicating and writing on a forum. You always have to go through this exercise of how can I structure a question in such a way that the receiver of the question is going to grasp it really well. And so that means when you go to your manager and you're about to ask the question, or you're in that meeting and you want to add a point, you want to make sure to have some sort of little introduction that explains why you're about to ask a question or what it is that you're about to do. Maybe hey, Bob or Jennifer, or whatever, whoever's your manager, right? I want to talk about compensation, and I wanted to ask you a question related to my compensation. Boom, that's that introduction. Immediately they know what you're about to, they know kind of the context of what's about to happen. Then you go into your body. So you start by saying, I think I'm underpaid, or, maybe yes, that's the secondary thesis. I think I'm underpaid. I've looked at data online and talked to my peers. Here's all the data that I found, and therefore I'm requesting a raise. And that's the conclusion. Right? You see, you structure it in such a way that it makes sense, it's palatable, and you will be golden. And finally, when you're doing stuff in writing, let's say you're commenting on a pull request, again, structure goes a long way. For instance, you say, so there's a problem with this piece of code. Boom, that's the first line. The person immediately grasps, okay, there's an issue. Maybe that's a little bit aggressive, but whatever for now. There's a problem with this piece of code. What you're doing is going to cause a bunch of re-renders on the UI, and it will lead to a memory leak. Boom, secondary sort of thesis. The person really knows what's going on. One way to fix it is to use such and such technique that will avoid the re-renders. Therefore, I suggest that you replace this with this native method that employs the technique. Boom. You see, that structure goes a long way, and that's such a better comment to put on a pull request than you should use this API because otherwise you're going to have a memory leak. What? What the fuck does that mean, right? You get the idea. Structure over communication, knowing your audience, maybe they didn't know what a memory leak was, or maybe they didn't know about the internal API, and so you want to make sure that you introduce it in a good way, goes a long way. Last but not least, tip number 4, this one has to do with intonation. And here, when I'm saying intonation, I'm going to capture things like gestures, things like written intonation, like using emojis, using punctuation, using, of course, vocal intonation, using pauses, taking pauses in your speech. All of this stuff is very, very useful in communication. So here, I could do an entirely separate video talking about just that, but, what I'll leave you with is just try to figure out where intonation can help you communicate whatever it is that you're trying to communicate more clearly. So for example, when I'm doing videos sometimes, if I'm trying to say a joke, but the joke uses, a curse word or something, then you'll often notice that I change my intonation in such a way that's very obvious to you, the viewer, that I'm joking, right? Like if I say like fuck, like I say it in a very happy way, right? Yeah, I know this sounds like, it might sound trivial to you, but that's the point, right? Like intonation, you use it in such a way that it conveys to your audience obviously what it is that you mean. Now, of course, like there are exceptions. If you're going with sarcasm, then no, fuck you, I'm not gonna use like correct intonation. And here again, hopefully like you understood my sarcasm. I'm not telling you to fuck yourself, but you get the idea, right? Like intonation, very important. Pauses, like right now, and I'm taking pauses as I go through my points. And of course, like what works on YouTube might work a little bit differently elsewhere. If anything, on YouTube, sometimes pauses can be a little bit annoying just because on YouTube people have a short attention span. Like for the people who are still watching this video right now, thank you so much. Don't forget to smash the like button. But a lot of people have short attention spans, so I try to not have a lot of pauses. But if you're doing a speech or if you're answering a question in a meeting, don't hesitate to take pauses. Take your time. Think through what it is that you want to say. Goes a long way. And then in written communication, using things like emojis or punctuation like exclamation marks can go a long way, because sometimes written communication is very like complicated. You can't really tell what it is that a person is like saying, or rather how they're saying it. Like for instance, if someone asks me a question and I say no, period, that comes across as the most aggressive thing that you can do in written communication. Even though in person I might just be like, no, and that's like not aggressive, right? So sometimes like it's better in written communication to say like, no, like, no, I can't, exclamation point. I'm just like giving a random example here, but I think you get the idea, right? You get that certain things come across a certain way in writing, and so you want to make sure that you avoid that. I apologize for the sound in the background. You want to make sure that you avoid that, or that you do whatever it is that you can to change the intonation or the perceived intonation and make it turn into what it is that you're actually trying to convey. So anyway, these are the 4 tips that I have for you. Hopefully you were able to retain something from them, get something out of at least one of them. If you did, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think about them. If you'd like me to do another video maybe in the future, going more into detail and like, nitty-gritty communications techniques, maybe only verbal communication, I'd be happy to do that. Just let me know in the comments below. And otherwise, as usual, I really appreciate your viewership. Don't forget to follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter if you enjoy short-form written content, Instagram if you like pictures, of course, liking this video and subscribing to the channel, and otherwise, I will see you in the next video.